More than 60 years have passed since America's heroic soldiers stood watch over the sandy dunes of Omaha Beach on the Normandy coast of France. D-Day, June 6, 1944, was unlike any day the world had ever seen. More than 5,000 ships, 12,000 aircraft, and over 150,000 Allied troops crossed a stormy English Channel to attack Adolf Hitler's Atlantic Wall to begin the liberation of Nazi-occupied Europe. It was the largest invasion force ever assembled. Since 1939, war had raged on the European continent and on the Russian front, with millions killed, many of them innocent civilians. For 5 years, Germany had left behind a trail of death and oppression across the countries of Europe. It was now time to end Nazi aggression. Operation Overlord was about to begin. America entered World War II after the Japanese sneak attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. 4 days later, Germany would declare war on the United States. American youth signed up for the fight by the millions.
Americans rallying to the colors.
We volunteered. We all had red, white, and blue fever.
And that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States.
The men and boys of D-Day came from all over the world. They were American, British, Canadian, and French. They came from different religious backgrounds. They left big cities and small towns to go off to war. Places like Houston, Texas, Rock Hill, South Carolina, and Woonsocket, Rhode Island. Many were just teenagers, and while some had fought in earlier battles in North Africa and Italy, most had never been in combat. June 6, 1944 would be cataclysmic. The future of democracy and the free world was on the line, but failure was always a real possibility.
Battles are won really in the hearts and the minds of the soldiers who are fighting them.
Allied Supreme Commander General Dwight D. Eisenhower was placing the future of the world squarely in the hands of soldiers just old enough to drive a car or take a sip of beer. But it was that same youth that had already helped turn the tide of the war prior to D-Day, so they too were handed the assignment of Operation Overlord. The invasion of Europe was gargantuan in its preparation, scope, and implementation. But for all its planning and practice, the landings on the coast of Normandy at low tide would depend on the individual GI, how he handled himself in battle, and whether he would be able to establish a foothold on the sandy coastline or be driven back into the English Channel in defeat. On the coast of France at 6:30 a.m. on June 6, 1944, the battle could have gone either way. And for many hours that day, there was doubt about whether Operation Overlord could succeed. The loss of life was indeed horrific, especially along the 7,000 yards of Omaha Beach, where the German defenses on General Erwin Rommel's so-called impregnable Atlantic Wall were the strongest. Men were killed before they could get off their landing craft. Bodies floated in a blood-red channel surf. Those who did make it onto Omaha Beach were often cut down as they tried to find cover from German gun positions, concealed as high as 170 feet above the bluffs. For those who were there at Omaha Beach, exposed in the open, it was worse than hell. Over 2,500 Americans were killed, wounded, or missing after just half a day of fighting. All along the Allied landing beaches, from Sword to Juneau and Gold to Omaha and Utah, and inland where airborne paratroops had landed the night before, the youth of the Allied nations rose to meet the challenge. Because of their grit and determination, the world would be forever changed.
Their unit cohesion was torn apart as they landed on the beach, but they huddled up against those limestone cliffs, and eventually that cohesion came back together because of the will of the soldiers. They understood the intent, they understood what was at stake, and they got it together, and they fought, and they overcame the odds, and they moved inland, and they ended up accomplishing the mission that day. It's amazing.
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking.
The 50-mile stretch of beach along the coast of Normandy is peaceful today, yet if you listen to the wind and the waves, they still whisper their compelling story. The footprints of 6 decades have come and gone, with an ever-changing and surging English Channel tide, yet one can still sense the presence of soldiers on these beaches. The echoes of war remain, the screams, the confusion, the hail of gunfire. But one also hears a resolve to stay alive and forge ahead in the face of overwhelming odds. The visible scars of war remain all along the Normandy coast. German gun emplacements and bunkers stare out at quiet stretches of coastline that once were strewn with thousands of mines, miles of barbed wire, and beach obstacles designed to destroy invaders. Bomb craters still pock the landscape like eerie scenes from the moon. Monuments to those who gave their lives are here too. Salutes to bravery and valor. For the men who came to these shores on June 6, 1944, the memories remain too vivid and real, even to this day. To understand D-Day, one must see beyond the passage of time, not only on the shores of the Normandy coast, but also in the faces of the survivors who came here to do what was asked of them by their country decades ago. Citizen soldiers like Army combat engineer Leo Heroux, Navy Higgins boat driver Richard Fazzio, U.S. Army truck driver Wilson Delasanta, U.S. Army heavy machine gunner Philip O'Connell, Navy radio man Frank Chomka, and 82nd Airborne Paratrooper Chris Heisler all signed on for the battle. What they experienced on these beaches and in the blackness of a Normandy night, jumping into the battle ahead of the invasion force, cannot be properly conveyed or understood in words or in writings, but perhaps only in their personal thoughts and nightmares. The passage of time does not always heal wounds or make things better. The men of D-Day have indeed aged, but like the wind, waves, and sand of Normandy's beautiful beaches, their actions are eternal and indelible. They will live on so long as the scars of war remain along a stretch of beautiful beach that saw the world change for the better in one 24-hour period on June 6, 1944.
People talk about fear, and I guess there was fear, but mostly it was concern about doing what you're supposed to be doing and doing it right.
I wasn't as scared as I thought I'd be, but I had a funny feeling in my stomach. At that time, I didn't know what it was. Later on, I found out they call them butterflies. I did have butterflies in my stomach.
You're scared all the time to do something. I was anyway. I imagine all the others were too.
I honestly never thought of, oh God, no. I was like as numb as I was, but I never witnessed or felt any fear of going into battle or anything like that.
Well, everybody was scared. Wait, we were only a bunch of kids, 20, 21, 19, and nobody knew what the hell war was at that time, but now I know.
We went to see Saving Private Ryan, and I think that was the last war picture I saw. I mean, and that picture was, the landing at the beach that day was almost like they were there filming. It was exactly like that, and even worse.
Preparations for D-Day began in 1943. As the Allies sought to establish a second front in Western Europe, the military buildup on the coast of Great Britain for D-Day was extraordinary, with thousands of planes, ships, vehicles, tanks, and Allied troops concentrated on the English coast, anticipating General Eisenhower's final order to go.
Something big was coming that we knew. When we were told that we're going to be leaving and to go to Southampton, I said, Southampton, that's right on the coast to go to France. So we knew we were going to go to France.
The whole sky was filled with airplanes, just about everywhere you could look. And the whole sea, as far as you could look, was incoming ships and boats and whatnot.
I said, there isn't that many ships in the world. There's that many of them there. There isn't that many ships in the world, you know. I saw so many planes. I actually felt sorry for the Germans because I didn't see any German planes.
Well, I would like to see, where I actually was, you know, where the beachhead really was. And if we were on the beach, if we happened to go on the beach, I would like to see from the German angle, you know, to see what took place there.
I mean, I'm looking forward to it, you know. I guess I just want to be there, that's all.
For Richard Fazzio, Chris Heisler, Wilson Delasanta, Philip O'Connell, Leo Heroux, and Frank Chomka, dealing with the aftermath of D-Day was put aside as life went on after the war ended, as their focus turned to their families and jobs. D-Day was seldom talked about, but over recent years that too has changed. Now many veterans have begun to return to the place where they saw so many of their fellow soldiers die, and where so many of their personal nightmares originated.
Why, I was amazed when we landed. I said, how could they be firing upon us with all that bombardment?
The men of D-Day are now facing their own mortality. Greater numbers of World War II veterans are passing on each day, taking with them frequently untold stories about a battle that transformed the world. Many are making their peace by returning to places like Omaha Beach to finally see a beach at rest, rather than one exploding in blood.
See where them guys are? Them two kids and two men. I was over there, down there.
I was just praying to get the hell out of here.
On D-Day, Leo Heroux was a U.S. amphibious engineer who was responsible for helping to clear obstacles on Omaha Beach, obstacles that had German General Rommel convinced would destroy an Allied invasion force. As Heroux approached Omaha Beach on June 6, 1944, what he saw left him visibly shaken.
It was awful. It was very, very, blood was all over. Blood was all over. And we saw the bodies, but we couldn't do nothing about that.
Heroux would survive the invasion and begin to create his own unique story on D-Day +1. That's when Leo, who spoke French, was ordered by his commanding officer to go to a field high above Omaha Beach to ask a French farmer to move his cows, who presented an unexpected obstacle. Leo asked the farmer where he lived and invited himself down to the man's farm in the town of Colville.
One night, it was a special night, I don't know why. I went there because I knew my way. I just knocked on the door, he opened it, I went in, and I happened to look up on the stairs, and a girl coming down. I said, well, I gotta let her come down because I can't go in. She's my age, my height, and her father introduced me to her, Anne Marie Brooks. I said, well, we went in a parlor and I had some milk, coffee.
Leo would end up marrying the farmer's daughter and returned to France after the war, where he would live for more than 40 years, teaching at a driving school in the town of Bayeux. Heroux eventually returned to live in Rhode Island, but a recent return to Normandy found him back at the farm and contemplating D-Day's impact on his own life.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah. That's the hill right down there. Everything was exactly the same thing. Nothing has changed except the pad. He had a pad going down. But as far as that, nothing has changed. Everything is exactly the way it is. And way up on top of that hill, that's where I met my father-in-law, and he told me, you see that house right there in the back of me? That's where I live. So I used to come over here, walk up them steps, knock on the door, and go in.
While Leo Heroux's D-Day experience ended with good memories, it was the opposite case for 82nd Airborne First Lieutenant Chris Heisler, who ended up a prisoner of war. The 28-year-old Heisler was aboard one of the 800 planes that would carry paratroopers into France ahead of the main invasion force. Over 12,000 airborne troops jumped into Normandy in the early hours of June 6th to secure the roadways and exits behind Utah Beach, to prevent German counterattacks from jeopardizing the efforts of the main landing force.
When we went over, finally got over the shore, I looked down and saw the beach of France, and I thought, beautiful beach down there. And before it got very much further, maybe a minute, maybe 5 minutes, I don't know, and I started seeing flak coming up at the plane. It wasn't very long after that somebody said to me, Stout has been hit. And I got back there, put him on the bucket seat, and laid it down. And at that point, somebody yelled at me, the green light is on, Lieutenant. Now, I'd already had the boys stand up and hook up because the red light had gone on earlier. And at that point, I turned, I said, hollered at the group,